أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلام تسليما. الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, I seek refuge in Allah from the rejected shaitan. May Allah bless our master, Sayyidina Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, companions, and give them peace. All praise is due to Allah, for He is sufficient for us. Peace be upon His slaves, whom He has chosen. As to what follows, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our next installment of Ul-Bayaan. But before we begin, I would like to make two announcements. The first one is our current sale on Nurzaman Institute's website. As you can see here, the book that we are covering today is on sale for $15 for a limited time. So if you didn't have a chance to cop your copy, it is the time to do it now for that discounted price. And you can find it again on Nurzaman Institute website, www.nurzamaninstitute.org. The next announcement I would like to make will be regarding our upcoming information session. As you can see here, it will be held on tomorrow at 8 p.m. The link will be in the description of the announcement on all of our pages, all of the pages that we're connected to, Imam Naeem Abdullah, masjidalmumin of Pittsburgh, Nurzaman Institute's Facebook page, and also the Half Your Deen Show page. Will have the information link so that you can join us in this Zoom meeting. And at this meeting, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, this will be the time to do that. Please come on time because the meeting is only for 40 minutes. And so again, tomorrow on March 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have our second information session regarding our Gambian Tour 2022 that will be held from June 18th through July 2nd, and we look forward to you joining us. That'll be all. Assalamu alaikum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ورضي الله تعالى عن سادة التابعين وعلماء العاملين وأئمة الأربعة المجتهدين ومقلدين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. As always, we begin with the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. We praise Allah, the Lord of the worlds, and we send a complete peace and blessings upon our Master, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon his family and his companions. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with the elite from among the Tabi'een, the right acting scholars, the four mujtahid imams, and all of those who follow them until the day of judgment. Ameen. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fatima, Isa, Fatima, Jihada, Hassan Ali, Hakeem, Samia, Abdul Bar, Abdul Rahim, Zakaria, Miss Joanne in the building. Alhamdulillah. Who else? Anthony and Fatima. Muhammad gave the salams like 3 times. Allahu Akbar. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. barakatuh. And my brother Adil as well. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I feel like I've been on vacation for the last week or so while my wife was teaching class. Alhamdulillah. I pray that what she taught was conveyed and understood well. Let me ask y'all, did y'all understand it? Was it beneficial for you all? Because this area is a very much overlooked area in is in Islam, in Islamic teachings, especially, it's basic things. All of us are supposed to know this, not just the sisters. Obviously, the brothers are supposed to know as well. The brothers are supposed to know, as we mentioned before, because of reasons of marriage and divorce and all of these things. Also, even if there is no divorce taking place, there's certain adab or mannerisms and etiquettes that must be observed when the wife is going through that period. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ku anfusakum wa ahlikum nar. O you who believe, save yourselves and your families from the fire. Part of saving your families from the fire, or us saving our families from the fire, is teaching them and training them. So this obligation of teaching these things first and foremost falls on the man or the head of the household, even though this is a so-called woman issue. If that issue, if that knowledge wasn't transmitted from her parents or teachers or something of that matter, it is the husband's responsibility to teach that. If one who doesn't have something can't give it, if the brother doesn't have that knowledge, he can't teach it to someone. But it's still his responsibility to teach his family. So I hope it is understood that this is not just a woman's issue. When we get to this section of fiqh, in this or any other book, as a man, I can just go back past it real quick because it ain't got nothing to do with me. Nah, it's not the case. If you have women under your charge and they don't know this stuff and you don't teach it, you will be held accountable because you will be disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He commanded you to save your families. Ku is a fitlu amra. It's a command from Allah. And I don't care which book of tafsir you look at. Ahlikum, after save yourselves, ahlikum, and your family. How do you save your family? By teaching them the bare minimum, the fardul ayn, bi ta'limihim wa ta'dibihim, by giving them, by teaching them what you're supposed to teach them, and by training or rearing them. Ta'dib, like from the word adab. It's hard to translate that word. Training. You can also translate as teaching, but it's more than teaching, like raising, training, rearing. So this is extremely important. So everyone has to know this, not just women. That's women issue. Go past it, get to the next chapter. Nah. If we don't know this stuff and we have the responsibility to teach it to someone and we don't teach it, that's on us. Alhamdulillah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Khadija. Alhamdulillah. Fatima says very beneficial. Alhamdulillah. Dorahim says, no, I got a question on a part, but inshallah, I'll call you later about it. Okay, alhamdulillah. So true. Some brothers are raising girls by themselves too. Exactly. It's good that you mentioned that because in some circles you would think there's no men raising children at all, right? It's just if they're single parents, they're only women, right? That's not the case. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Imari, I appreciate you for making this about women and men. And I didn't make it for women and men. Allah did, right? A lot of times we view things through alien lenses. Right? We make it a solely a woman's issue, where you know this is a fiqh book for men and women. If 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 it was just only a women issue, there'd be specialized fiqh books just for women, and that issue would only be mentioned in women books. I know that's what you mean. I'm just clarifying. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. So true. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So the next section that we're on, page chapter 15, chapter 47. I mean page 40. blah, 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 blah. Page 47, chapter 15 is an extremely important pivotal part of the book because for the most part, and it shows you all of these basic books of fiqh, right? You notice if you really think about what's taking place, all of the information prior to Salat is preparing you for the Salat. I mean, the Salat is so important that all of the ibadat or the acts of worship prior to the actual prayer itself is building up and preparing you so that your Salat will be accepted. And of those chapters and sections, in our school, the most important of them is what we're about to cover right now, the times of prayer. It's the most important of them. And we mentioned in passing a couple of times before that under extreme abnormal situations, almost all of the other conditions can be put aside so that the individual can make the prayer inside of its proper time. Meaning you might not be able to clean yourself properly. You might not be able to face the Qibla. You might not be able to be in a state of purity, meaning ghusl or wudu or something like that. You may not, for some whatever extreme reason, you may not be able to cover your private parts, right? But you better not let that prayer time go out. I don't know about other schools, but this condition of the salat is so uh, inviolable or inviolable. How do you say that? You're not so sacred. You're not supposed to violate it, right? That even you can see in this book right here is not even counted with the conditions of the prayer, the shurut of salat. Is mentioned separately before you even get to the conditions of salat. Shurut or conditions are things that must be in play, that must be established before you even begin the act of worship. Like before the thing starts, you have to make sure these things are right. And the prayer times are so important in our school that you see how in this particular book is mentioned separately and is mentioned even before the conditions. And a lot of these conditions, some of which we've covered already, they don't really kick in. They don't really take on as serious a meaning until the time of prayer comes in. So many things are revolving around the time of prayer. So I need you to really be listening, or if you're at work or doing something else, you need to come back and re-listen. And it's the same with any other class that we do. If you aren't able to pay full attention, like the videos aren't deleted, you can go back and listen to them at any time. So let's begin with Al-Fatiha for the soul of Shehu Uthman Dan Fodiyo. Alhamdulillah. Samira, are you ready?
Yes.
Let's go.
Bismillah, chapter 15, page 47 of Umdatul Bayan. The prayer times. Awqat as-salawat. The preferred time, Muktar, and on the bottom in the footnote, all prayer times are divided in two parts, the Muktar time and the Dururi time. Prayer must be made within the Muktar time of each prayer. If the prayer is delayed until the Dururi time without a valid excuse, the prayer is valid but not rewarded. If there is a valid excuse why the prayer was delayed until the Dururi time, it is valid and rewarded. If the prayer is delayed after the Dururi time, the prayer is late. For Dhuhr, the afternoon Salat begins from the time the sun begins to decline from its meridian, Zawal, until the length of the shadow equals the post-zenith Zawal shadow plus the length of the object measured.
Okay. So can you type this in the comments? The words Mukhtar and Daruri. These are two words you should remember. Like what was mentioned in the comments. See, a lot of us, because we live in this uh, toxic environment, and there's a lot of what we how can you say there's a lot of just buffet type of Islam. A lot of us never heard of this term. Uh, how many of you never heard of this terminology before with regards to Salat, Mukhtar and Daruri? I know when I first took Shahada, I didn't hear it for a long time. I was one of those people, follow Quran and Sunnah, like most of us. It wasn't until, you know, I became Maliki that I ever heard this terminology before. See, Fatima said never. Imari said never. Joanne said never. I was Muslim for about I was Muslim for about 9 years before I heard that. Fatima, my first time hearing of it. See, Samia, same thing. Samira, you, not initially upon Shahada. Ahmed, I didn't hear until I started studying the method. Exactly. No, not with that. See, that's most of us. It shows you how this environment and is affecting us. And this stuff is extremely important. So I wanted to teach you three terms. Two of them are on the screen. So every salat time, every salat, right, has is divided into two time periods. Two time periods. The Mukhtar and the Daruri. The Mukhtar time is when you're supposed to make the salat. You shouldn't let the Mukhtar time go out unless you have some other reason beyond your control. The Daruri time is still within that salat time. But it's the last. It is the end part, and the definition of what is Muktar and what is Daruri differs with every salat. As we read, we're going to explain. So from the time that the salat comes in to the time that the salat goes out, you have the Mukhtar and Daruri. The preferred or choice time, which is Mukhtar, and the Daruri, which is necessary. You gotta make it. If you laid around and and didn't make it during the Mukhtar time without an excuse, just you was just lazy, you didn't feel like doing it or whatever, right? As the comment said, the salat, the prayer is valid, but is not, there's no reward in it. And if you look at the commentary of Surah Ma'un, uh, Alladhina hum fi salatihim, wailu lil musallin, woe to those who pray, right? Alladhina hum fi salatihim sahun, those who delay their prayers. If you look at their commentary, you would think that this refers to exclusively people who just let the prayer time completely elapse, Mukhtar and Daruri. But it also refers to those who let the Mukhtar time elapse without an excuse. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wail lulil musalim. Wail, what does that word mean? Usually it's translated as woe, like it ain't good. Anybody know what wail means? Wail lulil musalim. Woe to those who pray. Why would Allah be saying woe to those who pray? Does anybody know what wail means? Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Talib. Many of the commentators say that wail is a level of the hellfire. It's more than that. All of y'all saying it, all of y'all saying, all of what you are saying is right. Woe to, Samira said emphatic warning. Hakeem said warning, right? He says exactly. Doesn't it refer to a valley in hell? It does. Wailul lil musallin. Woe to those who pray. Those who delay their prayers outside of their time. Yeah. So this is not a light matter. This is very serious. So, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamaat, the four schools of thought, you're going to hear this terminology. Most of us who, came into Islam, either we were outright Wahhabis or Wahhabis that didn't know it, default Wahhabis, or had some significant influence by Wahhabism, whatever, whatever, whether we knew what a Wahhabi was or not, or whatever, whether the title existed or we heard about it or not. If you become Muslim here, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be a Wahhabi, you're going to be a default Wahhabi, or you're going to have some Wahhabi residue on you. And from the comments, this is our state with most of us, including myself. So those are two of the three words that I want you to become familiar with. Mukhtar, Daruri, every salat. Then another word, Qada. Qada means it's late. The time went out already. Is over with. So Qada means the prayer time completely elapsed. The prayer time had a completely elapsed. So the other word is Qada. That's the other word. So many Muslims think it's okay to make all their obligatory prayers when they get home by not knowing prayer has to be prayed in their appointed time. May Allah help us to be better. Ameen. So, the first prayer time that is mentioned, and you find this is consistent when the prayer is being taught and all that. You notice it always starts with dhuhr. Most of us in our logic think, why don't it start with subha or fajr, right? Most of us know fajr. Why doesn't it start with subha? It's the first prayer of the day. Why? Because dhuhr was the first prayer that Angel Jibril came, because if you know, Angel Jibril came and demonstrated not only how to make the prayer, but he also did a demonstration on the extreme limits of the prayer times for each prayer. He prayed with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 2 days, and the prayer that he started with was dhuhr. Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Maryam and Abdullah. Right, it's the same word, same thing, Zachariah, Qada, same word. So the Shehu says the Muqtar time for dhuhr, the Muqtar time, I'm spilling in, excuse me. The Muqtar time for dhuhr, which is the afternoon prayer, or the midday prayer, some people call it, right, begins from the time the sun begins the decline from the zawal, or its meridian, until until the length of the shadow equals the post zenith shadow plus the length of the object. I know that sounds confusing, so I need y'all to pay very attention. Come closer. Pay very close attention. Come closer. The zawal, or midday, is when the sun is at the highest part of the sky. And that's not always directly above your head. It depends on what time of year it is and whatever. So it may not always be, 180 degrees above you, but it's the highest point that the sun is going to be that day, right? Then it starts to come down a little bit. When it starts to come down a little bit, that's the beginning of the Mukhtar time for Dhuhr. For most of us, that time is going to be a shadow. Unless the sun's directly above you, where there's no shadow, there's going to be a shadow. This is important, that why when we learn these things, it'd be nice if, like, if we had a class and we could like go outside before time and just be kicking it and looking at the sun. Like, okay, that's the highest it's going to get. We'll start to come down a little bit. All right, get something and let's measure the shadow. Yes, it's called zenith in English, zawal in Arabic. So we got to make a hypothetical scenario here. Emphasis on hypothetical. Might be different where you're at. Let's say we took something. I don't know. Let's say we took a person. Let's say this person was 6 feet tall. Remember, this is hypothetical. Let's say that this person was 6 feet tall. And when the sun starts to decline from its highest point that is going to be in the sky, that person's shadow was 1 foot long. That person's shadow was 1 foot long. Again, hypothetical. Person 6 feet tall, the sun starts to decline, shadows measured, the shadow is 1 foot long. So let me read that first sentence again. The preferred time for dhuhr begins from the time the sun begins to decline from its zawal until the length of the shadow equals the post zenith shadow plus the length of the object measured. So we said the person's 6 feet tall. We said when the sun starts to decline, that person's shadow was 1 foot long. So we measuring in feet, right? So the person is the object that we use in the measure is a person. He's 6 feet. His shadow at the time that the sun started to decline was 1 foot. So 1 plus 6 is 7. So the Muktar time begins when the sun starts to decline till the shadow equals 7 feet in this hypothetical situation. 7 feet long. So the Muktar for Dhuhr is out. Y'all follow me so far? Tala follows. Hakeem follows. Alhamdulillah. Isa follows. Anthony gets it. Amina follows. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Demetrius. Zakaria said yes, it's finally clicking. Alhamdulillah. So far in reading, we established the Mukhtar for Dhuhr. And we don't need to read footnote number 22 because I'm explaining it. I'm doing the explaining right now. Uh-oh. Imari and Miss Joanne is having problems. Uh, which part is throwing you off? I give you a few seconds to type. The 6 feet or 7 feet. That's throwing you off, Adu. Okay. We made a hypothetical uh, scenario. The hypothetical scenario is that in this case, we're going to use a person as the measurement of the shadow. You can use anything, but in this case, we're going to use a person. We said that this person was 6 feet tall. All right. So the object that we're using to measure the shadow in this hypothetical scenario is a person, and that person is 6 feet. We said that when the sun started to decline, we measured that person's shadow. and that person's shadow was 1 foot long. That person's shadow was 1 foot long. So the Sheikh said in the book that the Muktar time begins when the sun starts to decline. When the sun starts to decline, you're not taking into account the shadow for the purposes of dhuhr being in. But you are measuring the shadow out at that time because you're going to need that number later. In other words, when the sun starts to go down just a little bit, dhuhr is in. But you're not worrying about the length of the shadow, but you are measuring the shadow for future reference. Like I said, this scenario is hypothetical. The measuring the object whose shadow we're going to be measuring is a person, and that person is 6 feet tall. When we measured him, when the sun started to decline, his shadow was 1 foot. So now we know that this person is 6 feet tall, and so we know that in order to know when the Mukhtar time elapses or goes out, we need that shadow measurement from when Dhuhr first came in, plus the length of the object. And we said this object is a person and he's 6 feet tall. So 1 plus 6 equals 7. So the Mukhtar time goes out when the shadow is 7 feet long in this hypothetical situation. You wanted to say something, Samira?
I put in what you had just to reiterate, just to read it again. To reiterate, to determine the Mukhtar time, which is the preferred time, the time in which we have to make our salat, right? For example, like you said, you used a person that stands 6 feet tall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their shadow at the time of decline. So the zenith is the sun is at its highest point in the sky. Once it start declining, meaning coming down, you're going to develop a shadow depending on the length of that object, this person, or have you, right? You
I
look at
want to pause right there because you might always have a shadow. Sometimes the sun isn't directly above your head, which is when you have no shadow. Sometimes the sun is never directly above your head. You
so
understand?
right. So when the sun starts to decline from the zenith, so you have to actually look and see what the zenith is to determine what the shadow looks like for you, right?
Right. Where
So
you are, it may be no shadow,
right,
or it may be a shadow. Whatever
may
the case, you need that number.
right. So when you see the sun starting to decline, you look at that shadow and look at its length. You eyeballing it. You're not going to have a tape and say, okay, this is 10 feet, whatever. You notice that it's a certain length, right? And then that person's height, which happens to be 6 feet, right? If you 5 feet, 4 feet, you add that number to that measurement of the shadow. And once you see that combination, that distance, that shadow, that's Muktar time. So that period is what you have from the time that the sun declines until it reaches where it's your height plus that shadow that you determined was at the decline is the Muktar time. So that's when you're supposed to make your prayer. So your shadow is going to gradually grow until it becomes your height. Then you're going to wait a little bit longer, which is the initial measurement of the shadow at decline after the zenith, after the zawal. That is the Muktar time. So then you're going to proceed on to the next prayer. You're going into the next prayer if it's outside of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you can you edit your comment and just specify dhuhr?
Yes.
Right. The shadow declines. I mean, as the sun declines, the shadow grows.
Right.
No, I'm responding to Sister Mariam. So, like in the morning, for example, when the sun rises, you have a long shadow, right? Or objects have long shadows. As the sun gets higher and higher in the sky, the shadows get smaller and smaller and smaller. Then it reaches its highest point, and then the shadow starts growing again when it starts declining the other way. What I normally do, because we live in a city, I usually use telephone poles, light poles, telephone poles, whatever you want to call it. When Dhuhr starts coming in, I look at that. And like Samira said, this is not like some exact science. Oh, you know, I need a tape measure. No, just rough, right? Rough, you know, estimate. So I'm looking, okay, sun is at about its highest point. What that shadow looking like? Take note of the shadow, and then, I'm roughly looking. I'm standing. Okay, the shadow's getting longer and longer and longer and longer. Okay, it's about the shadow when I see this uh, when I see the shadow uh, equal the length of that pole along with uh, whatever the shadow was when the sun started to decline, then okay, I know Asa is in. And again, I'm not climbing up a telephone pole with a tape measure. It's just like a rough estimate. You can use a lot of things, as long as the shadow can be uh, measured. As far as the salat for the traveler, we're going to get to that later, inshallah. Adu. And what about bad weather? You just approximate from what it was yesterday or what have you. Another thing that's so important about these prayer times, that when you actually know how to tell when the prayer comes in, and then you compare it to the apps that a lot of us use. I hate them things. I don't use them. But when you start to compare, you're gonna be like, whoa, wait a minute. This prayer ain't even in. And the app my dawn is going off. You know what I mean? Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Kamila. Okay. So that was the Mukhtar. What we just covered so far was just the Mukhtar time for Dhuhr. Can you continue reading, Samira?
Yes. The preferred time, Bismillah. The preferred time. Well, I didn't read measured. Do you want me to read the footnote for number 22 or no?
No,
Okay.
because all that all what we what all that we were just
Sorry.
explaining, all that what we supererogatory. Everything we were explaining is what the footnote is attempting to explain, right? And
Subhanallah.
I just put the footnote there just in case somebody picks up this book and without a teacher, because a lot of times I've seen in books where people try to explain it in the translation. You can't do it. It's too much to take into account to just have it in the translation. Sometimes they'll say something like when the Mukhtar time is up until the shadow is twice the length of an object, and then you thinking about you might, oh, it's the same as Hanafi, right? No, they just not explaining it right. Or when the shadow is or 1.5 times. What they're trying to do is explain all of this, and you can't just do that with a couple of words. You have to really explain it. So,
That's why it takes teachers to learn this
yeah.
deen.
Okay, continue.
Bismillah. The preferred time, Mukhtar, for Asr, the late afternoon salat, is from the time the shadow of a thing is equal to it in length until the time the sun turns yellow.
So, basically, what he's saying is that when the Mukhtar time elapses for Dhuhr, Asr comes in. So in other words, when we got up to the shadow of the length of an object, period, Asr comes in. And the Muktar time of Asr is going to be in until the sun turns yellow. You know, as the sun starts to decline, it becomes easier to look at, and it's not as white, and it becomes yellow, right? So when the sun turns yellow, the Mukhtar time for Asr is out. Continue reading.
Bismillah. The necessary time, dururi, for both of them, dhuhr and asr, lasts up to sunset.
When I first started learning this stuff blew my mind, right? Because, learning how we learn, one salat comes in and then it goes out, and then the next salat comes in and then that salat goes out, right? But so if you're reading with us or you're listening to us, you heard it right. You notice we didn't mention anything about any Doruri time until just now. So what does that mean? That means that when Asr comes in, Dhuhr is still in. It's the Doruri time though. And then when the Doruri time of Dhuhr is in and Asr's in the Mukhtar time simultaneously, then the Mukhtar time of Asr comes, not the Mukhtar, sorry, hope I'm not confused. Then the Dururi time for Asr comes in, right? The necessary time for Asr comes in when the sun turns yellow, right? So now the sun is yellow, right? Asr been in for a minute, the sun is yellow, right? It didn't set yet, but because you can see it, the sun is yellow. So now the Dururi time and the Dururi. Samira, stop influencing me with your supererogatory stuff. It's your fault, right? The sun turns yellow, right? Now you have two salats that are in, and they're both in the Dururi time, Dhuhr and Asr. And the Dururi time goes out when the sun sets. And I have to be specific, and I have to get more specific about what we mean about by sunsetting, right? You wanted to say something?
Yes, because you was doing all that supererogatory.
It's your fault. It's contagious. This is a sickness. It's a supererogatory sickness.
Just to reiterate, just to clarify. So we already determined what the preferred time for dhuhr was, right? And the shadow, right? How to determine a shadow. That shadow is telling you what is the Muktar, the preferred time for dhuhr, right? So once the shadow at the decline of the zenith happened, plus the length of a thing, you, somebody else, after that, Asr comes in, right?
Right.
When Asr come in, it's the Muktar time for Asr, meaning the preferred time. What the Imam was trying to say is that when Asr comes in, the preferred time that Dhuhr is in, but the Dururi time, the necessary time that you have to pray if you had not prayed during the preferred time previously. So that's why he said simultaneously, the Dururi time is happening at the same time as the Muktar time of Asr. So how long is Asr? Asr is going to last from the the length of a thing, right? And until the sun turns yellow. So from the time the shadow of a thing is equal to in length, so however tall, just say for instance, we use 6 feet. Say the length is 6 feet, right? The shadow is equal the length of the the whatever it is that you measure against, right? Until the sun turns yellow. keep in mind, the sun is still in the sky. You can see it. It's turning yellow. It actually looks white. If you actually watch it, it looks white before the Muktar time goes out for Asr. So when it starts turning yellow, that right there is an indication that now you're going into the Dururi time. And when that happens, you are both in Dururi time for Dhuhr and Asr up until sunset.
Now, there's, I was reading it. I'm talking about the English translation, and if you have your book with you, you should write this in there. Going back to that sentence, the preferred time, Mukhtar, for Asr, the late afternoon Salah, is from the time the shadow of a thing is equal to it in length, then in parentheses, plus the length of the object measured until the time the sun turns yellow. Because that's what is meant while Mukhtar wa Mukhtaru lil Asri min al Qamati Thani ila Isfirari, right? That's what is meant. Uh,
Okay. Okay, I missed that. So the object, the length
no,
of
it's
that.
it's a typo. It
Oh,
should be there in English in parentheses.
okay. Got you. Can you repeat that?
I'm going to say how it should be said.
Okay.
The preferred time, Mukhtar for Asr, the late afternoon Salah, is from the time the shadow of a thing is equal to it in length, and then in parentheses, squeeze in there, plus the length of the object measured until the time the sun turns yellow.
So to reiterate, the preferred time, Mukhtar, for Asr, the late afternoon Salat, is from the time the shadow of a thing is equal to it in length, and then in parentheses, plus the length of the object measured, close parentheses, until the time the sun turns yellow. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Now, when we say sunset, in other words, just pretend that you're watching the sunset. You know, some of us are like real romantic. I love watching the sunset. Well, just imagine you watching the sunset, right? And the sun is setting. You can see it, and the bottom of the sun touches the horizon. So now the sun is starting to disappear. That's Dora and Us is out now. You shouldn't be praying at this time. And we're going to come back to that because this is there's another important misconception that we're going to come to, especially when we might come to it today. Let's see, inshallah. And but when we say sunset, uh, that means in this case the 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 sun itself starts to disappear. Now you're not waiting till the sun completely disappears. When the sun completely disappears, that means Maghrib is in. The next prayer is in. But while the sun is in the process of setting, meaning it's starting to disappear, as soon as it starts to disappear, Dhuhr and Asr is out. And remind me to come back to this point for a reason. Mariam said, no more Dhuhr after the yellow sun. The Dururi time is still in after the yellow sun. That's why it says the Dururi time for both of them, meaning Dhuhr and Asr, lasts up until sunset. So once the sun turns yellow, you have the Dururi time for two salats happening. The Dururi time for Dhuhr, that been in, meaning the Dururi been in for Dhuhr, and the Dururi just started for Asr. I think our sister Zaneda made a chart when we had this class privately. when we had the private session. If she did, see, let me see if I have it. Oh, now the computer went act slow. She made it short. I'm just not sure if I have it, or if I do have it, where did I put it?
I'm looking to.
Yeah, I don't know where it is. I remember she made a chart though. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Continue reading. So now the sun is completely set, right? And just in case you don't pay attention, when the sun completely sets, it's not dark outside. It's darker, but it's not like completely nighttime. Go ahead.
Bismillah. The preferred time, Muktar, for Maghrib, the evening Salat, is determined by the time it takes to perform it after its preconditions have been fulfilled.
In other words, once the shurut have been established, in other words, as soon as the sun set, you should be getting ready to pray.
The preferred time, Muktar, for Isha, the night Salat, is from the disappearance of the twilight glow up till the end of the first third of the night.
Okay, this is going to need some other explaining, but I think it'll be a little bit easier to understand than all of the explanation we did for the Mukhtar of Dhuhr. So, Isha comes in. If you pay attention when Maghrib is in, especially if it's clear outside, it's not cloudy, right? And this is just in passing. A lot of times, like if it's cloudy outside, obviously if it's cloudy outside, it's going to get dark faster. Don't be fooled if it's cloudy outside and it's dark. It's Maghrib. Like, Maghrib may not be in. So it's important that we pay attention to these things every day. But in any case, right? If you notice when Maghrib is in, there's a twilight in the western sky, meaning the sun is gone, but the light from the sun is reflecting on the sky, and it has this reddish, purplish type of look in the sky. That's called the twilight. When that disappears, Isha is in. And that's not a long period of time. That's 45 minutes, an hour, or something like that. That's not a long period of time at all. Maghrib is in, out. Not a When I say Maghrib is in, the Mukhtar time for Maghrib is in, out, real quick, maybe an hour, depending on where you at. Or talk like I'm from Pittsburgh, an hour. How they say hour? How they say it, he mad? An hour. So once the twilight disappears, Isha is in. Now, you have to do for Dhuhr, we measure in shadows. Now for Isha, we measure in time periods. So it says, yeah, the Muktar time for Isha is from the disappearance of the twilight up until the end of the first third of the night. The end of the first third of the night. So that means you have to measure nighttime. Nighttime is measured from when Maghrib comes in to when Subha comes in. Maghrib to Subha. Subha, the morning prayer. What most of us know as Fajr. From the time Maghrib comes in to the time that Fajr comes in. That time period. You divide it up into three parts. That first third is the Mukhtar time for Isha. That makes sense? Let's make it real easy with round numbers. Let's say Maghrib comes in at 6 o'clock, right? Now let's say Fajr comes in at 6 a.m. That's real even numbers. It's real easy. 12 hours, right? 12 divided by 3 is what? 4. In our hypothetical situation, Maghrib came in at 6 p.m. Fajr comes in at 6 a.m. Again, hypothetical. 12 hours. You dividing the night into thirds. So you breaking it up. That's why you're dividing it into three. So 4 hours from 6 o'clock is 10 o'clock. So you can say that the Mukhtar time for Isha in this hypothetical scenario is from the time that Maghrib go from the time the twilight disappears up until 10 o'clock. Because the first
Hassan.
that's we hear you. We hear you, Samira. Black women always yelling at their kids. So is it that the Doruri time for Asr is the shortest of all Salat? It starts at the yellow of the sun set and is out. No. Remember, the day and night, the length of daytime and nighttime changes. So when the day is real long, the Doruri time for us is going to be longer. I don't know. I never really paid too much attention about how long the Doruri time for us will be, but just to correct your typing, it says it starts at the yellow of of the sun, not sunset, yellow of the sun, and is out when the bottom of the sun hit the horizon. Oh, she sent the chart on WhatsApp. Okay, I'll find it maybe, inshallah, and add it to the comments or something. So you'll caught that about the Mukhtar time for Isha? This is beautiful when you think about it, because it means you have to pay attention to Allah's creation. You have to pay attention to the sun, the shadows, the sky, stars. You have to pay attention to these things. And it shows you how much we're being cheated because, you know, we think things are being made easy for us, but they're disconnecting us from our tradition. We just wait for some algorithm based app to make some noise and the adhan goes off and we think the prayer time is in. so you see, as you know, as we learn Islam properly, and we start learning these things and realizing what we have to pay attention to. Because remember, again, this is Fardul Ain. These are individual obligations. This is not scholarly stuff right here. These are things that every mukallaf is supposed to know. And Allah is not going to place upon any soul a burden that it can bear. None of this stuff is high advanced science. It's just looking at what's going on around you. But you see how they got us so messed up that we're just dependent on things that other people could created and can control, that we're disconnected from our own tradition. It's a shame. Anyway, continue, Samira.
Bismillah.
You
The
finished yelling at
nece-
the kids?
I'm done. Bismillah. The necessary time, dururi, for both of the Maghrib and Isha lasts until the rise of dawn, Fajr.
Okay. Just like Dhuhr and Asr, there's certain times in those both of those prayers they overlap into each other. Maghrib and Isha is the same way. Maghrib and Isha is the same way. So when the Mukhtar time of Maghrib goes out, the Daruri time of Maghrib is in, and Isha is in at the same time. Sometimes, especially with Maghrib prayer is so in and out so fast, and you trying to fulfill the conditions, whatever that may be, getting to the masjid, finding water, or using whatever, right? And like, oh man, I missed it. You didn't miss it. You may have missed the Mukhtar, but the Daruri time is in. You're not late. When I learned this, I was like, subhanallah, wow, alhamdulillah. So he said the necessary time, the necessary time, daruri, for both of them, it should say them. It says the, for both of the, it should say them, for both of them, meaning Maghrib and Isha, lasts until the rise of dawn, the wrong Fajr, Tulu Ishams.
Bismillah. The preferred time, Muktar, for Subha, the morning prayer, is from the first light of dawn until the first brightening. Do you want me to read the footnotes for both?
Yeah.
Okay. So for 23, which is for first third of the night, the measurement of the night time starts at Maghrib. In other words, if you are trying to calculate or break down the night into thirds, three equal parts, you start from the beginning of Maghrib time until the beginning of Subha, i.e., the first light of Fajr. Footnote 24, the brightening. This is before the sun has risen, but it's bright enough to make out a person's face from a distance.
So that's what's meant by the first brightening. In other words, because when Subha first comes in, it's still very dark outside, and especially if you live in a city and you come out while it's in, it's still like it look like it's pitch black, right? But even before the sun rises, right? You see, obviously, it starts getting brighter and brighter, even though the sun hasn't risen yet. And as it's mentioned in the footnote, what's meant by the first brightening is when you're able to make out someone's face from a short distance. Continue.
Bismillah. The necessary time for Subha lasts until sunrise.
So uh, the Dururi time for Subha is obviously from the first brightening up until the sun rises. So again, you're looking in the east, the sun rises in the east. Once, and that's assuming you can see the horizon, right? Once you see the top of that sun, subha is out. So it doesn't mean when the sun is completely up. It means when you can see the top of the sun coming up from the horizon. And you have to keep in mind because, for example, you may wake up, right? And it may be bright outside. You're like, oh, I missed it, right? You may not have missed it. It may because if you ever pay attention to these things, it's bright outside when before the sun even rises. It looks like it's the sun had risen. But read the next sentence.
Bismillah. Prayers are considered late and must be made up, qada, after all of those aforementioned times.
I want to go back. Mariam was responding to Zachariah, I believe, and she's correct. You can tell those street lights and city lights, they really don't affect being able to see the twilight disappear for Margaret. Am I wrong here, Imam and Samir, regarding the street lights? I could be mistaken, but I think I see. No, I agree with you. I think the hardest thing to determine living in the city is when Subha first comes in, or what we know as Fajr first comes in because it's extremely dark. I think it's darker than the color we call midnight blue. Some cars. I remember my father had a car back in the day that was midnight blue. That was the color. A car that's midnight blue looks black a lot of times. Sometimes you got to get right up on and recognize, oh, this car is blue. That's midnight blue. Midnight blue is more bluer than when Fajr comes when Fajr first comes in. And living in the city just makes it even harder. And then the scholars talk about a false Fajr and a true Fajr, because there's this light that shoots up and then it goes away, but that's the false Fajr and stuff like that. But the part that I wanted to mention in uh, here, the last sentence, it says the prayers are considered late and must be made up after all of those times. Now, up until studying traditionally, like we're doing now, there are some times where it's prohibited and or makruh to pray, haram or dislike to pray. Those times are when the sun is at its zenith, before it starts to decline, when we talk about dhuhr, while the sun is in the process of setting, while the sun is starting to disappear, and while the sun is in the process of rising, like when the sun is starting to appear, right? Well, one thing you have to keep in mind, like we used to think, like, okay, I woke up too late. I miss Subha or I miss Fajr. Ah, I gotta wait till the sun finish rising. No, you don't. If you miss the prayer, and let's say you miss Subha or Fajr, right? And you get up and the sun is starting to rise. You don't have to wait. You're supposed to prepare yourself for prayer and pray right away. No delay. Any prayer that's qada that you already missed, no matter what time it is, you got to pray it. Well, I can't pray right now because the sun is at its zenith. No, you got to pray. You're not supposed to delay. Well, the sun is setting and I miss Asa. No, make Asa while the sun is setting. That's qada. That's the making up the missed prayer. Nawafil or extra prayers, yeah, you don't pray during those times. But a prayer that you already missed, you make it regardless of what time it is. Are there any questions? I didn't think I was going to be able to do that one day. Yes, even if the sun is rising and you miss subha, you make it while it's rising. Those prohibited times of prayer don't count for a prayer that you just missed and you got to make it up. You don't have to wait until the sun completely rises and then make up the fajr that you just missed. No, you prepare yourself to pray and pray. And there's a whole other section on making up missed prayers. So we probably mention some of these things again. Because even there's a way that you're supposed to make up missed prayers. That's chapter 19. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ibn Zakaria. I'm just waiting to see if any of you have any questions on what we covered today.
I'm gonna upload the chart real quick.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, they sent it. Alhamdulillah.
You gonna show it on the screen or you just gonna put it in the comments?
I'm gonna show it on the screen.
Okay. We hear you humming.
Oh, sorry.
You yelling at the kids, then you humming. Exactly. I have a really long one. Can you wait for a few minutes? Yeah, we'll wait, inshallah.
You see that?
Yeah.
And there's another one. Can you see that? Can the audience see that?
I can see it, but I can't read it unless I had it on probably on a big screen. Imari wants you to send her them charts.
I'll put it in the Imam Naeem Abdullah's page. Inshallah.
So it's important to know that once again, part of the Dhuhr time actually goes into Asr time. Likewise, part of the Maghrib time goes in to Isha time. So I'm waiting for Bint Zakaria to put her question in. Man, that must be a long question. While we're waiting, don't forget about the Black Imams Roundtable tonight at 7 o'clock over there on Masjid Muhammad of Atlantic City's platform. What if you're 5 feet like me? I don't know how to subtract. It's only, I don't know how to subtract it. I'm only 9. So when someone's taller than 6 feet, add 1 feet, right? But if you're shorter, then how you subtract it? No, that number that we gave was just hypothetical. We just a random example. The, what you have to do is measure the shadow when the sun starts to go down, whatever number that is. We just said 1 foot, just for example, but it could be different. It could be less or more, right? And then when the shadow is equal the length of an object plus whatever that shadow length was when the sun first started to decline, that is the end of the Muktar time. So when we were saying 6 feet and 1 feet, that was just for our make believe example on how to do it. We use, because in our make believe example, the person was 6 feet tall. And in that same make believe example, his shadow was 1 foot long when the sun started to decline. So that was just a make believe example. The numbers are going to be different. You might use something like a ruler to measure or anything. And it, like I said, it's not like an exact thing, right? Like I said, a lot of times I do it because I'm living in a city. There's light poles everywhere, and so I'm always looking at the shadow that's coming off of the poles. Okay, she got it. Alhamdulillah. Okay, alhamdulillah. We're going to close out, and it's about time for Maghrib here. Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakat in our knowledge. May Allah grant us understanding and implementation of what we have learned and give us the ability to transmit it to others. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت واستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.